Thank you, everyone. I hope the audio and the video were clear. So with that, I would like to start the webinar by giving the floor to Dr. Nasser Saidi, the chairman of the Clean Energy Business Council, to give the opening remarks of the webinar. Dr. Saidi, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ahmed, and thank you all for joining us, particularly all our panelists and participants who will be talking a bit later. So this webinar is really one of the main focuses of some of our activity, which is on future mobility. We set up a future mobility club some 2 years ago, back in 2019, and the perspective is very clear. We know that there's going to be a transformation revolution happening in the transport and logistics industry in the decade to come. We all need to prepare for it. We know that the footprint of the transport industry and its contribution to climate and to the ozone, to our life and pollution is very high. At least maybe 20%, if not more, comes from it, depending on where you live and the local climatic conditions. So the idea behind the Future Mobility Club was to discuss this revolution, this budding revolution, and to see what to do about it. And we wanted to start off, of course, with the UAE, because we consider that the UAE is taking some pioneering steps in encouraging electric vehicles. So we conducted a survey, and Ahmed will take us through some of the results of that survey a bit later. So some 225 companies participated in that survey, which happened over July to September 2020. And we're going to be presenting the results of that survey. And again, the idea behind it at the end of the day, and hopefully coming out of the panel, we'd like to see some recommendations coming out. What should we be doing about policy? Where are the gaps? Where should we be directing investment? What are the critical aspects for policymakers in particular to focus on? It being very well understood that e-mobility in the widest sense is by its very nature a public-private partnership. You cannot escape that. It cannot be one part and not the other. So if you look at the challenges that came out of the survey, they were not surprising. So let me quote and cite 3 of the main challenges. First is the cost of ownership. The current cost of ownership of electric vehicles, particularly when you're paying upfront, the cost of acquisition is still much higher than non-electric vehicles. And other point I would make is that some of the cheapest electric vehicles are still not available in the UAE. And even Tesla, which is present, raised its prices in March. What we need to do is 2 things, therefore, to think of how do we introduce cheaper models so that the cost of acquisition becomes lower, and how do we encourage really producers and distributors to lower the costs so as to gain market share. That is the trick. We know that the prices are declining, particularly because of technology. Battery costs have been declining particularly at an accelerating rate. And the cost of the battery, we know, is a major contributor to the cost of the car. So one aspect is how do we introduce some of the cheaper cars? I don't want to make any advertisings, but some of the Korean, Chinese, and other cars are much cheaper, and even some US cars are much cheaper. Second major challenge is, of course, the driving range. And remember that the questions that were asked of companies. So the companies are thinking of their fleets, they're thinking about their own employees who might be using electric vehicles. So it's not surprising that, again, driving range is still perceived to be too low. And obviously that's going to be related to where you can charge and how quickly you can recharge your electric vehicles. But the driving range is a critical one, particularly if you're thinking about transporting goods across the UAE or anywhere else. So that's another major challenge. The third challenge, of course, is the speed of charging. How quickly can you charge, and what is the availability of charging points? There has been quite a bit of investment in the UAE over the past 2-3 years, but there's still a long way to go. So what is the technology telling us? Will we be able to charge much more quickly? That's the direction and seems to be in which it seems to be going. So hopefully our panelists and also participants will be able to guide us and tell us what perhaps is the recommended path, what sort of investments we should be making. So let me stop there, but simply to say that as the CBC, we're very much supportive. We'd like to be participating in this revolution, which is happening at least through all our members, but also to want to influence policymakers to establish an economic ecosystem that allows this to happen. Provide whatever incentives that are required. But above all, I think what I'd like to hear from you, and others I think would like to hear from you, is what sort of partnership should we be thinking of between the private sector and the public sector. So let me stop there and welcome you, and thank you for Ahmed and the team for having organized the survey, and let's make it widely available to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Saidi. And I start sharing my screen here. So with that, I would like to start the webinar. So again, the webinar is about electric vehicles in the UAE, the challenges and opportunities. So the webinar should take 1 hour 15 minutes. So hopefully you will all be able to join us for the whole webinar time. This will be in webinar mode, which means attendees cannot speak. So if you have any questions throughout the webinar, please make sure to put them in the questions panel, which you should have in the GoToWebinar platform. We'll try to answer as many questions as we can at the end of the webinar. So please put your questions there throughout the presentations. I'll give a very short presentation about the survey itself and the responses we get from the survey and what are the key conclusions we came up with. So before that, I would like also to thank our sponsors for this webinar and the white paper, Green Parking as platinum sponsor, and also Anaboda Commercial Group as the gold sponsor. So I think I'll spend a minute here because you already have seen the video, so I don't need to spend a lot of time on the introduction about CEBC. But just very quickly, we are a not-for-profit membership organization that represents the private and private sector within the clean energy market in the MENA region. And what we do as CEBC, we provide a dialogue, establish a dialogue between private and public sectors, and that mainly to accelerate the policy maturity within the different clean energy topics we work on. We work on behalf of our members to promote the different projects, initiatives that they establish, and we also aim to develop and present policy solutions in partnership with our members. What we do throughout the year is mainly clearly as for example, this platform is one of the activities. We provide advocacy and thought leadership. We publish a lot of reports, white papers, policy papers, and case studies. And by the way, all of our research and publication is always available for the public. You can just go to cebcmena.com and Knowledge Center, and you will find all of our publications available for free. We organize a lot of events, conferences, and webinars. So if this is your first time to join, please make sure to subscribe to our newsletter so you get notifications of all the upcoming events. We have a lot of partnerships as well with international and local organizations. So this the portfolio of our members. We have a very diverse membership portfolio from very large utility companies to very small startups, covering all the different aspects of clean energy. We have a lot of partners as well that we are very proud to be working with them on different initiatives, projects, and research. These are the work streams that we are focusing on. Future mobility is one aspect, but we cover 4 other topics: climate finance, low carbon hydrogen and energy storage, energy efficiency, and last but not least, women in clean energy as well. The Future Mobility Club, as Dr. Saidi mentioned, this was started to support the transition of the automotive industry, starting from the UAE first, and then hopefully expanding also to the other countries in the MENA region. And that aims to transition the automotive industry to be more green and smart as well. We do a lot of policy dialogues with the different government entities trying to advocate for different policies. And these dialogues are only available for the CEBC members. So if you're interested, please get in touch and we can provide more details about how to become a member. We do a lot of other activities that are available for anyone who can follow our news. The paper, again, this paper was a very short paper based on a survey. So if you go to the handouts section, it should be in the platform that go to open now, you should be able to download it right now. So just go to the handout section and you can see the paper. Hopefully you can read it after the webinar and give us your feedback. The scope of the paper and the survey that we designed the paper on is to provide an overview of the current status of the EV market in the UAE and also outline the challenges and opportunities for the market in the UAE based on the responses that we got from the survey. And the last point, which is also very important, is also based on all of this information that we gathered to be able to provide recommendations, mainly for policymakers to improve the deployment of EVs, especially, which is also very important to mention, the fleet electrification, because we focus mainly on this survey on companies, not individuals. So the survey was actually sent and submitted by companies. And so this is very important to highlight as well. Just for those of you, I think most of you might already know this information. So right now there are more than 6,000 EVs within the UAE. 50% of them actually are in Dubai alone, and actually more than 80% of this total number is Tesla. And at the same time, also there are more than 700 charging points. So we did an exercise to map the charging points. 65% or more of the charging points, these are public charging points, also to be very clear, and more than 65% of them are available only in Dubai. There's a lot of incentives, but only in Dubai that's leading the incentives scheme. I think other Emirates are catching up, but mainly you'll find most of the incentives available in Dubai. You can now charge your vehicle using the public charging stations for free until end of 2021. You have free parking as well, free registration, and SALIC free. The landscape, again, hopefully other countries will follow, but UAE is currently the leading early adopter of EVs in the MENA region. We have Jordan, Egypt, and Saudi are taking very good steps, but so far UAE is the leader in the market. And the government has taken a lot of steps to electrify the government fleet within the different Emirates. There's still a lot to be done, but this was a very good step to start with. And right now, if you take Dubai as an example, they have installed 240 public charging stations, and I think they are planning also to expand the network of public charging stations within the current year and next year as well. Currently, these are, if you look at the table on the right-hand side, these are the currently available electric vehicle models in the UAE. And if you compare that with other markets, other developed markets or mature markets, these are very, very little options. And once you see the survey in the coming slides, this was also one of the challenges that companies are facing. There's not enough available models in the market for them to choose from. So a quick summary of the survey and the results. The survey was carried out between July and September of last year, and we did that through an online survey platform called SurveyMonkey. We had 228 companies submitted the survey. These are companies, not individuals. So you can see here, most of the companies who responded were private sector. We also had a very small number of semi-government companies and municipalities. And these, on the right side, you can see the sectors of these companies, mostly from the electricity, oil and gas, and also manufacturing came. Also, there's a lot of manufacturing companies and factories, and also construction companies were aiming to do that. Surprisingly, transport companies, the companies have fleet of vehicles, whether to rent them or to use them for different usage. We didn't have a lot of them, but we had a big some representation of that sector as well. This is the size of the company, and it's interesting to see that most of the small companies are actually the ones we have a lot of data for them, and the following data would show what these companies are planning to do. We're hoping that we would improve the survey by having more of the big corporate companies within the coming few months. So that would be good, because those have also big part of the fleet that's on the UAE roads right now. Most of the people who submitted the survey will have some kind of seniority, so I think the data should give some representation of what their decisions are. Some of the questions we asked was about the current fleet, existing fleet, and the future demand or the future plans to expand the fleet, what kind of vehicles they are planning to expand the fleet to. And you see most of the fleet that's currently available within these companies are light passenger vehicles, followed by SUVs or 4x4 vehicles. And there's no difference almost on the current existing fleet and how they would like to expand. I think they would like to still maintain within the current type of vehicles, light passenger vehicles and SUVs. And that gives you an understanding on which kind of vehicles, EVs, might be needed for companies within the UAE. In terms of considering EV and the expansion plan on the right side, there's very good news. Actually, we didn't expect that, but that's very good. Almost 70% are considering to have EVs in their expansion plan. But again, there are still some challenges that if we overcome, I think this percentage might increase as well. The EV demand. So if they expand the EV, if they include EVs as part of the expansion plans, what kind of vehicles they would like to have as electric? I think that builds up on the previous two questions. It's very clear that light passenger vehicles and SUVs are the most two that are needed within the expansion to EV plans. This very important question as well. We tried to survey if those companies who are willing to expand to EVs, somehow they might need to install their own EV charging infrastructure. So we asked them if they would be interested to actually make this infrastructure available for only their employees or only their fleet, or to make it public for visitors if they are providing a service, if it's a factory and they have visitors, etc. Or, and the last one is very interesting, make it public on a commercial basis, so we will get revenue out of that by providing this service once the charging is not for free, of course. And you can see here that a lot of people actually considered to install the charging infrastructure and make it available for the public for commercial reasons. Even though when we track the data back, some of these didn't really actually consider EV or electrification of the fleet, but they still considered having infrastructure available for the public, so have this installed as a business for them. And that's interesting to see, because that means there's more infrastructure, which also would have more sales, or more people would adopt EVs on the long term. So we try to combine then what the challenges these companies are facing, or what they think are the main barriers. And here are the top 6 challenges that we found. And if you see here, I think if you translate this into some kind of high-level challenges, the orange one most likely means there's lack of awareness, because they are not sure. So which means the information might be available already, but they don't have access to that information, or there's some kind of misconceptions as well. So the charging speed was one of the concerns. a lot of people think that the current charging speed is not enough for them to electrify the fleet, especially if it's a fleet for transportation, which means they have to run this fleet for as long as possible or operate it for as many hours as possible during the day, which means any charging time you make this vehicle wait for is a loss for them. So some companies think that's not enough, but again, a good number of companies think that's enough for them to go ahead and electrify the fleet. In terms of the enough choices of models, I presented the available ones in the previous slides, and I think almost 45% of the respondents think this is not enough, and we need more models for them to choose from, especially the ones who would like to have SUVs as EV, because we don't really have that variety of options for electric SUVs in the UAE. Sufficient driving range and the capacity of the battery. That's there's a good awareness around this. The majority of the people, almost 60%, think that's good enough for their needs right now. So another point is we asked them if they would electrify it for marketing reasons or for environmental reasons. A lot of people went actually for environmental reasons, even if the price or the long-term investment didn't make sense for them, they would still be interested to electrify their fleet for environmental reasons. The total cost of ownership of EVs versus internal combustion engine vehicles. A lot of people, and I think that's already true, and there's a lot of work that has to be done on this, think that the current total cost of ownership of EVs are less than ICE vehicles. So this, I think, especially in the UAE, where the prices of the oil is very low and people still have this kind of awareness, I think that's a good sign as well. But at the same time, the price, especially the initial cost of investment and the purchase price of EVs are still not very affordable for a lot of the companies. So that's the last one you can see. So a lot of them think it's not feasible for them to purchase with the current prices that are available in the market. So just to summarize, the challenges that we saw is the cost of purchase, the initial cost of investment, and the cost of infrastructure investment. If those companies have to install their own infrastructure for their vehicles, they think that's still high and one of the barriers for them to electrify their fleet. The charging speed and the availability of charging points, they also think this is one of the challenges. And the last one is the driving range or the capacity of the battery and the limited number of available models in the market. But at the same time, we came up with a lot of opportunities that we saw based on these results. For example, as you saw in the results, that 68% of the company representative would consider EVs when making changes to the internal fleet. There is already awareness and it's already under consideration. So most of those choose light passenger vehicles and SUVs. But light passenger vehicles came first, and that's good because we already have some good available models in the market for light passenger vehicles. So you don't really have to wait for more models to be available in the market. Also, the last point which I mentioned is there's interest from these companies to install EV charging infrastructure and make it available for public use and also for the employees, which on the long term will have more people, will have impact on the number of people who would adopt EVs. This is my last slide, and sorry I took so long time. The recommendations we came up with is to provide incentives for the price of EVs. I think there's a lot of fiscal incentives could be provided, and we have seen in other parts of the world this had a direct impact on the adoption of EVs. Still expand the available EV models, and that through continuous dialogues and conversations with the OEMs, the EV manufacturers, and also the dealerships. The government has to speak to them and perhaps also provide them with some kind of incentives to be able to expand their models or bring their models to the country. Add more infrastructure. The more infrastructure you have, the more awareness the more people will see them, and the more people will buy EVs. Public-private partnership is very important, especially with the government now installing EV infrastructure. So once there has to be some continuous and direct partnership with the private sector. and last but not least, also improve the public knowledge regarding electric vehicles and the infrastructure. I spent so much time, so I apologize again for going beyond the time. So with that, I'll start, give the floor to the presenter, Nicholas from Bloomberg New Energy Finance, who is working as EV and automotive analyst. So Nicholas, over to you. You have 10 minutes. Please go ahead. So just a reminder again for the audience, please put your questions in the question pan. We'll answer as many as we can at the end of the.
So good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks, Ahmed, for inviting me here, inviting us, BNEF, to present at this at the launch of this white paper and survey that you've conducted. And it's great to be here again and presenting to you and to your to the members of your organization. I hope that you can see my screen and that everything works well. Please let me know.
Yes.
Yep.
All good.
Cool. Nice. So let me start by saying what BNEF is. It's a primary research organization working on a range of issues, and the underlying theme, of course, is the decarbonization of economies and societies at large. Where I work at is the group that we call advanced transport, that is looking at the decarbonization of road transport in general. And today I'll talk about the electrification of road transport, primarily of passenger vehicles, but also a little bit just a mention of other sectors that are moving also towards electrification. So let's start by where we are at the moment and where we have come from. So this chart here shows annual sales of globally of passenger electric vehicles, and by electric vehicles we mean battery electrics and plug-in hybrids. So vehicles that have a plug, not the standard, let's say, Prius hybrid, but the Prius plug-in hybrid is part of those numbers here. And 2020 was a very strong year for electric vehicles, about a 50% increase in sales, driven to a large extent by what happened in Europe. But practically, we'll come back to that point. But practically, in most global markets, electric vehicle sales have increased in 2020 within a wider declining automotive market. And the reasons and here we see the growth rate of electric vehicle sales versus let's say the ICE sales, but also as a proxy of the wider auto market. And the reasons that this has happened is are manifold, and we expect that to continue. And this have to do with a number of big drivers for the adoption of electrification. One being, of course, policy, and that is both national and local policies that are gaining a lot more traction. The second one is, of course, this technology mega trend, and that's happening around batteries, battery chemistries, and the improvements that we see there. And the third one is, of course, the supply chain that's building up the availability of models slowly in the last couple of years, but at an increasing rate for now and at the moment, and just putting in the market more and more desirable vehicles. And let me just make one particular point here about policy and what, at the moment at least, drives electric vehicle adoption in many different markets. And that has to do with fuel economy or fuel efficiency targets for tailpipe emissions of passenger vehicles. And these are quite stringent. I mean, if we look at Europe and China, of course, these are some of the most stringent targets that we have globally. And the US, it seems, at least at the moment, to be moving towards that direction. So a very large part of the global auto market is subject to those rules. These rules are getting more and more stringent, and that is what is, at least at the moment in the short term, is driving electric vehicle adoption. And that is quite important, of course, because let's see what before we go to see that the effect that these rules have had. And here we see the share of electric vehicles in total vehicle sales in all major automotive markets. And what's happening in Europe in the last, starting at the second half of last year, primarily at the last quarter of 2019 and into 2020, is that close to 1 in 5 new vehicle sales in Europe last year in 2020 were electric, either battery electric or a plug-in hybrid. And the reason for that is that the new regulation of 95 grams of CO2 per kilometer, the new target, it came into effect last year. And so automakers tried to meet that target, had to meet that target, and one of the main tools that they used to do so is the deployment of more and more electric vehicles. And that happened across practically all the brands of car makers that are selling in Europe. So these are the electric vehicles share of sales within each manufacturer. So, for example, Daimler and Volkswagen also exceeded about 15 or even 20% of sale of electric vehicle sales in their total vehicle sales at the last quarter of 2020. And that is important. These regulations are important in the short term because they have a direct effect, and that direct effect is the development. They push the development further and further of battery technology, which also makes those vehicles more desirable and cheaper and having better performance. So this is a cycle there that reinforces itself. And what we see here, the blue. The blue triangles there are historical prices of batteries sold in the market, primarily for a number of applications, but also primarily for electric vehicles. So battery prices, the volume-weighted global average battery price was about $137 per kilowatt hour in 2020, and that was about 90% lower than the price that we had seen in the market in 2010. And based on that, and based on the volume of vehicles and the volume of capacity that's being deployed and being commissioned to manufacture batteries, we expect to build what we call the experience curve, and to try and understand where battery prices are going to go in the future. And what we see is that by 2030, we can see about $60 or just under $60 per kilowatt hour for battery prices. And at about 2024, under $100 per kilowatt hours. And that is these last two numbers, 2024 and $100, are quite interesting and important, because at around that price, when you're at $100 per kilowatt hours or less, more and more vehicle segments are starting to become battery electric vehicles built for more and more vehicle segments are starting to become price competitive with equivalent combustion engine vehicles on an upfront cost basis. So when battery prices drop below that level, you do get to see this economic competitiveness of battery electric vehicles primarily increasing and addressing larger and larger parts of the global market, of the global auto market. So this is the main driver of change that we see in the future. Primarily, everything built on top of that battery price and the trajectory of this battery price, in addition, of course, to many other effects that are taking place in policies and the corporate environment. So putting that all these things together, we look at where we expect electric vehicle sales to be, and that's for passenger electric vehicle sales to be in the next few years. So on the base of that, we see quite a strong adoption of EVs over the next several years, and over the next several years, with some markets primarily in China and in Europe going forward faster than other places. Again, on the back of those very strong fuel economy and fuel efficiency regulations. In China, there is also a sales mandate that compels manufacturers to sell a specific number of electric vehicles every year. But passenger electric vehicles are not the only sector that's being electrified or that has the potential to electrify. In fact, a large number of buses globally is already driving on a battery. And we expect that trend to also continue, again, based on the economics of buses, the total cost of ownership, and the predictable routes that most of them make. The next segment there that we see that has a lot of potential, again, based on a TCO, is the light duty commercial vehicles, primarily vans and lighter trucks or medium duty trucks even, that operate in urban environments, either doing deliveries, doing distribution, or even in heavier segments doing like utility vehicles like garbage trucks and vehicles like that. So we do see a few more sectors following on through the declining battery prices in order to see a higher share of electric vehicles in their in annual sales, and of course in their fleet. So that is quickly and broadly the overall picture of where electrification is now, and how we see that developing on the basis of technology improvements and policies. And let me just finish here by talking a little bit about charging infrastructure and what all that means about charging infrastructure. And I'll focus in particular to fast and ultra fast chargers that have been growing at about 90 or even more than 90% every year. The installations of those chargers at about 90% every year for the last 2 or 3 years, compared to a much lower rate of growth for slow public chargers. And these fast chargers are not being installed only on highways, where we may have expected them a few years to be their let's say their natural habitat, but they're also being installed in urban environments. So we're looking at retailers and restaurants and supermarkets, and different collaborations between companies that are trying to expand the fast charging network. And that does not come on its own, or a lot of the new vehicle models, battery electric vehicle models that are being introduced in the market, have higher and higher charging power, or availability to charge at higher power ratings. And what you see here is every year the vehicles, the battery electric vehicles that have come on the market, and what the charging rating of those vehicles are. And as we see, there is an increase that takes us to more than 100 kilowatts and 150, and many vehicles, not only high-end vehicles, but also more mass market models, are having the capability to charge at higher ratings. And that's
Nicholas, 1 minute, please.
Yes, I'm wrapping up. So, and on the basis of that, of course, we see where the charging network, how the charging network is going to develop globally, and we divide that in a number of different use cases. Slow chargers at home and work will be the largest number of connectors that we'll see, with a lower number of connectors for public and commercial charging. Commercial meaning chargers installed within business premises, but those two segments will have a higher power rating, and that is important. And I'll close with this slide here, because despite the fact that most of the units will be slow chargers, the most or a large share of the energy, about 43% of total energy by 2040, we expect that to be delivered by fast and ultra fast chargers. And the difference there has to do with the availability, the utilization, and the business models that one can build on the back of a fast charging network, and the ease of use to an extent that allows higher utilization and availability of those fast chargers. So charging at a rate of 10 to 50 times quicker than a slow charger does allow those utilization to increase, and some of the business models to be deployed and developed. So that's where I close. Just want to say thanks again to Ahmed and CBC for inviting us, and looking forward to the rest of the presentations.
Thank you, Nicholas. Very good. I think this presentation gives a very good global perspective, so we can compare how is the UAE doing compared with other parts of the world. So with that, I would like to introduce our second speaker, Sam, who is the CEO of one of our most active members, Green Parking. So Sam, the floor is yours. Yeah, we can see your slides now. If you can go to the first slide and make it full screen, that would be great. We can't hear you, Sam.
And can you hear me? Can you see me?
Yes, now
Hello?
we can see you, we can hear you. Eyes are clear as well. You have 10 minutes, please go ahead.
First of all, I would like to thank the EBC for organizing this great event today and for inviting me to be one of the speakers. I'm especially amazed knowing how many people are joining us and listening to us from all over the world today. So truly impressive and well done. And welcome to all of you. My name is Sam Alawi. I'm the CEO and the founder of Green Parking. And our presentation today is going to be, why can't I see the screen now anymore? I only see speakers. Thank you. It's going to be about EV charging challenges at hospitality projects compared to residential and commercial buildings and solutions that we can provide. And this first slide already shows different types of electric vehicle chargers that are there on the market, because we can't expect all of you listening today to be expert in electric vehicle charging networks. So on the left side, you see a smart charger that has one plug. It comes 3 kilowatt up to 22 kilowatts. The middle charger is the fastest charging AC charger, goes up to 44 kilowatt for 2 plugs, so you can charge 2 cars at 22 kilowatts. And just for you who are not experts in this, this allows you to basically charge a car within an average of 2 hours. So these 2 chargers on the left and in the middle are what we call destination chargers. So basically you are charging while you are at the destination. And what you see on the right side is a fast charger. This is what Tesla calls a supercharger. It starts at 50 kilowatts and goes up to 350 kilowatts. So if you're charging with 350 kilowatt DC charging, you basically nearly reaching the time that you would normally spend now at a petrol station when charging your combustion engine cars. So this is the difference. Okay, what are the current trends in the UAE? The first figure you see here is a rather sad figure. Okay, so we have a total of the UAE, which is the leading country in the region, 5,000. Ahmed said before 6,000. Let's make it 7,000 electric vehicles. This is very, very sad number, especially after what I heard now. About from Nicholas saying that last year 3.1 million electric vehicles were sold worldwide, and we got 2,000 of them in our region. So this is not really acceptable, especially because we are now facing 2 major crises worldwide and also in our region. The one is global warming, and the second one is the high pollution of our central cities. So we need electric vehicles in larger numbers to be able to tackle these challenges. The good news here is that we have around 700 smart chargers. We are very proud and glad that we were able to supply 500 of these. So this is maybe a world record, that the ratio at the moment in the UAE between chargers and EV cars is around 7:1. If you compare it to Norway, it has around 20:1. And in my opinion, we could have easily sold 100,000 electric vehicles by now. And the main reason why this has not been done, I don't think it has to do anything with the government incentives or any other reason. It's simply because mainly the distributors of the car manufacturers are not selling or promoting electric vehicles in our region. But this will change dramatically during the next couple of years. There's no other way. So here you see these 700 chargers are unfortunately unevenly distributed. We have 80% of these chargers in Dubai and around 20% in all the other Emirates and Oman, which is of course a problem when you are leaving Dubai with your electric vehicles and you want to go to another Emirate or you want to travel to Oman. Where can you charge these electric vehicles? Now we have 4 possibilities where you can charge. At government infrastructure, here it's mainly utility companies, either DEWA or FEWA chargers. You can charge at your home, which is the easiest way. If you have a villa, for example, or a townhouse, it's the best way to charge your cars at your home. And then we have the possibility to charge your cars at hospitality and shopping centers and at office or residential buildings. And this is what we are going to focus on today. Looking at what do shopping centers and hotels, as well as commercial and residential buildings, have in common with respect to electric vehicle charging, and where do their electric vehicle charging needs differ. So what do they have in common? The first thing that they have in common is they need destination chargers. They don't want to have fast chargers. They want you to stay for quite some time at their destinations, because if they have a very, very fast chargers in their locations, then people tend to stay in their cars and then just take the service and then leave. The second point is they need to provide a charging infrastructure to end customers. So this is no longer an option. It has become a necessity. Every single tower, every single community in our region and GCC must have electric vehicle chargers in the future, actually now. So it's not like having an elevator. Yeah, if you have a tower, you don't have the choice to decide whether you're going to have an elevator or you don't have an elevator. If you don't have an elevator, you're not going to have any customers and you're not going to have any tenants. And this is what's going to happen with respect to electric vehicle chargers as well. All of these projects now and for the future have limited spare power to handle the current as well as the foreseeable demand. And the last point here, what they have in common is they all need smart chargers. They don't need basic chargers. So here you see the main types of chargers. The left one is, I think most of you know, this is a basic charger supplied by Tesla. And whereas Tesla has had a lot of merits with respect to e-mobility and promoting e-mobility, in this sector, they don't, because they basically flood the market with basic destination chargers, but this is not what the infrastructure of these facilities as well as the countries need. These facilities need smart destination chargers. And the reason for that is in that slide. We will not be able to cover all these points due to limited times, but the difference between a smart charger and a basic charger is that the smart charger makes your location visible on the app. It, for example, tells you how many chargers a site has, whether these chargers are in use or not in use, whether they are working or not working. And very, very important, in the future, you would be able to reserve a charger. So you're driving to a mall, and half an hour before you reach that mall, this smart charger would allow you to use your app and reserve that charger for you so nobody else can take it away. Where do these two industry segments differ? So we have spoken before about what they have in common. Where do they differ? The most important point here is the price for end users. So hospitality and shopping centers would like to provide and continue to provide charging at their locations free of charge, because they want these people, these visitors, to come their side, and as this is destination charging, they want the people to get out of the cars and go for lunch or go for dinner or stay overnight. And this is how they make their money. So they want to have these groups visiting their shopping centers and hotels. Whereas residential and commercial building only need to provide the infrastructure. They have no benefit from the tenant who is renting an office, that the same tenant every day uses the electricity of that outlet or that building without him or her paying for the energy. So they would like the user to pay for the electricity. This is the first point where they differ. And the second point where they differ is the management of the charging times. So in a hotel, for example, they don't want to limit your charging time for 2 hours or 3 hours. They actually would love you to stay for a week, because the longer you stay, the more you consume, the more money you spend at that hotel location. Whereas in the residential or commercial building, they need to segment the supply in accordance to the demand. So we will always have more cars requiring charging at these locations, and they cannot allow, for example, an employee coming to a commercial building in the morning, plugging his car to the charger and then leaving the car plugged for 10 hours where he or she works, and nobody else would be able to use it. So management of the charging time, operating of the chargers will be very important for them. And because of these issues that I just explained, we came up with our own software solution, our own app, which is called the EV Network by Green Parking. But there are also other solutions that can provide similar services, and this is what it is about.
The Electric Vehicles Network by Green Parking. The Green Parking EV Network is a web of electric vehicle chargers spanning the Middle East that aims to make EV chargers more accessible to the public by installing them in areas such as hotels and shopping centers. Our mission is to provide free of charge accessible smart chargers for the ever-growing wave of EV drivers on the roads. Our chargers are all connected to an online platform and accessible through an innovative and easy-to-use app. The app will not only tell you where a charger is, it will also display its availability, status, reservation information, and even provide directions to it. The Electric Vehicles Network by Green Parking.
So what is the electric vehicle network been? It's the first cross-border network of electric vehicle chargers in the region. It's free of charge infrastructure system. It consists only of smart chargers. It's installed only at commercial developments, and it covers the gap of maximum 130 kilometers, and it will be expanded to all GCC countries. So very, very important what I want to say here, that the app solution and software solutions are going to be crucial in the very near future to solve the problems that these infrastructure projects, whether they're commercial or whether they're hotels or shopping centers, are going to have. What are the benefits for the commercial buildings as being part of the EV network? In addition to real-time charger availability information, you get reservation options. You're flexible over the charging time per user. You get reports, statistics. You can remotely access and immediately respond if there's a problem with the software or with the chargers. And very, very important for the commercial locations is that it provides you through the app various payment options. So you can charge back to your tenant either through prepaid, postpaid, credit cards, etc. And if somebody misuses the charger by just plugging longer than he or she should have plugged, it gives you a tariff enforcement through the app as well. So you basically prevent that person from misusing the software again. In summary, and we come to the last two slides, in the very near future, charging systems will become imperative at most residential and commercial projects. charging hardware is becoming less important, but really it's very, very important that you use smart chargers. And finally, the overall smart management software and management concepts will instead determine the level of service quality and customer satisfaction a developer would want to provide. And the last slide, what can green parking do for you as your partner in the EV revolution? Why do we think we could be suitable for you as a partner? Simply because we have been 25 years in this region. We have a reputation as one of the top 10 SME companies in Dubai. We have currently the largest market share of smart chargers. We currently operate the only cross-country network of chargers in GCC. And I think as a very, very underestimated point is being the largest parking operator, we believe that the new service stations for electric vehicles in the future are going to be the car parks and not so much the service stations. And we will be shortly expanding to all GCC countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sam. Just to be mindful of the time, so if I may ask Abhilash, so we take Mark first, then we conclude with Abhilash, if that's fine. Abhilash? Is that okay?
Yeah, always do that.
So Mark, please go ahead. You have 10 minutes. Mark Carlson, again, so he's the Director of Customer Service and Quality at Middle East, about the challenges from an OEM perspective. So Mark, the floor is yours.
Okay. Hold on, I'm
If you could make it full screen. Yeah.
Yeah. Can you see my screen?
Yeah, but we see also your teams, etc. So it's better if you just share the slides.
No, I don't see the screen.
Now we don't see it, Mark.
No. The screen's not, the slides are not coming up.
No, share it again, please. I think you
There we go.
unshared.
I needed the prompt.
Is it coming, Mark?
No, that's, yeah, no, it's come.
We see your email. If you can just open the slides. Yep.
Let's go.
So would you like us to go with Abhilash, then come back to you, Mark?
Yeah, I don't know what's gone wrong here.
Okay, so let's, yeah, now just
Can you see now?
We see the, if you can change the mode of review, the view mode.
You see now?
We see it, but if you can make it full screen, it's if it's an issue, then yes, now it's perfect. Go ahead.
You can see. I can't.
Yes. You can see it?
All right. Okay. Yeah. Good afternoon to everybody. Basically, really a very short overview, really, of where we are with electric vehicles from an OEM position. We look today, as we've said, it's now probably a time to switch to EVs for a number of reasons. I think already we've talked about government policies are now pushing us more to EVs. There are a lot of energy and environmental issues that we're faced with today, which we were never conscious of or ever thought of before. The total cost of ownership as well with EVs today is becoming more and more equal. I think we see today is that now diesel comparative in Europe, we can see that it is on par with a lot of EVs when it comes to total cost of ownership. And we're seeing more and more corporate clients, we would say from the fleet perspective, especially for us in Europe, are implementing the CO2 limits into their policies. So everyone is changing their thought process, and we're seeing more of governments moving, which I'll talk about slightly later, towards that we need to make a change from fossil fuels. Okay, mobility for all of us is a concern, and what I'm saying here is basically, if you look at greenhouse gases, European level, road it looks approximately at 19% of the contribution to greenhouse gases comes from road. There are over 400,000 fatalities per year per estimate from the WHO guidelines regarding air pollution. We live in here in the Middle East. We live in a climate which is very heavily with air pollution, not only from road transport or transportation, but we also have a lot of dust in the air. We see climate change with greenhouse gases because we know a lot of our vehicles that we see today highly pollute. So more and more for what we see within the region, there is a need as well as a concern, I think, for all our own health purposes, is to move to more of an EV and a more environmental friendly mobility solution. Just to give you an idea of EV contribution to the stakes on the environment, we have to consider as well that if we have electric cars, we have to produce electricity. And I think, firstly, a lot of people don't look at the fact that we have to produce electricity, but it's the understanding of how we produce the electricity. So we see over the past, probably I would say over the past 5 to 6 years now, that the life cycle balance is much better than what it was for previously. We are seeing mainly if you look at France produces electricity from nuclear energy, whereas a lot of other countries produce electricity from fossil fuels. So there is a balance that you're going to produce more electricity from fossil fuels, but you're going to reduce the environmental effects of the vehicle from the gases with the electric vehicle. So you're balancing the two, but as we see today now is that we're seeing that EVs are zero pollutants from what they emit, but now we see the decarbonisation of electricity production throughout, and what I've given the factor is Europe here because of the way Europe has moved. It's becoming a major player to now switch us more to EV because the balance is now shifting in the right direction. Government policies as well really have driven us in the right direction as well, or are driving us. And as you can see there from 2019, major cities in Europe introduced low emission zones. What we will see is that countries throughout Europe as well, over the next 5 to 10 years, are going to completely reduce diesel and internal combustion engine. So the policies are pushing as well as what the OEMs are being driven to do. GM announced this year that they will go totally electric by 2035, Jaguar 2025, and Ford in Europe by 2030. Their products will be totally electric vehicle or electric products. No longer will they produce ICE for those markets. So it's a very, very point of time that we face is probably if we looked at this 5 years ago, there were no of these low emission zones, or there were no government policies, and the number of electric vehicle sales at that point in time was very low. I think we talked on the first presentation regarding the number of sales that have been in 2020, mainly through Europe. And again, it's through policy that has driven that with the if we look at the WLTP emission program, has driven manufacturers to produce more. We have to produce more because of the penalties that we face, which is driving the consumer in the same way on that basis. So it's now playing a part where the cost of the vehicles are reducing, the consumers are more aware, and everyone is moving in that right direction. I think one point, again, which is actually mirrors with the first presentation, is that CAFE, or the fuel economy regulation policies that have been introduced throughout the globe now that we see, are pushing again to EV. I take, though, quite an interesting concept here, is because we live right in the middle, or we live next door to one of the areas where the CAFE regulation has been introduced, which is Saudi Arabia, which was introduced in 2015. As an OEM, and as all of the OEMs today, we are at a stage where we have moved into the second phase of the CAFE, because it was a first year, it was a 5-year phase, and now we're moving into the phase 2, which will take us through to 2023. And for those of you that aren't au fait with the CAFE, is that there is obviously in Saudi Arabia, there is a fuel economy target for a fleet for the light truck and the passenger car. And the idea is that you need to be underneath the target. You don't need to exceed the target. In the fact is that your vehicles are high polluters or high fuel consumption. So we're seeing that being driven, but at the same time, we're not seeing the EV market accelerate in Saudi Arabia, which is a very interesting concept. And it's found today is that the actual advantage of an electric vehicle in Saudi Arabia is not really available. There are different regulations, but we are at the beginning of the chain where we don't have infrastructure, we don't have the ecosystem to support it. So when you think about electric vehicle, you must have the ecosystem around it to support it before you go to push it forward. And if we look back in Europe, we look back at US, China, 10, 15 years ago, they started on this trip, on this road journey, and it's because the ecosystems have developed. So to produce and make vehicles, sell more vehicles into countries, you really do need to have the ecosystem. So it's something that we really need to think about on that basis, that without an ecosystem, even with government policy, it becomes very difficult. On that basis, which we're using the example that I've just given you. So if I take on the complete experience, what are we looking today? Financial incentives are something which do help. Cost of lithium has come down from what we were in 2010, 2007, especially from Renault. We started in 2007 with electric vehicles. We've seen that cost decline, and obviously the vehicle declines. We have lots and lots of benefits, but we need smart grids to support this, and the electricity system will become very, very important to all of us, because to be able to support a country with a high volume of electric vehicles, you need to have a smart grid, you need to charge, you need your culture needs to change in totality. So we have to take all of these things into consideration. As I've said, connected services, as Sam talked of earlier, it will allow you then with smart chargers to book your place, to understand where you're charging, where a charger is free. Today, we even face here in Dubai is that I've seen, because I drive an electric vehicle, numerous occasions I have gone to the mall where I normally go to on a certain day, and find that now, whereas 3 years ago, the charger was always free, or there was one space, the charger is taken. and the person's in the Mall. I don't know how long that person's going to be in the Mall. So what do? I'm faced with the fact is that do I need to charge or have I got to wait? So all of these things, they are objections what we would put in the automotive, from the automotive side, is to a customer that will be looking to, or a retail customer, what we would say is to looking to buy a vehicle, because awareness is very important. And a lot, when we look at a lot of countries, when we look here in the UAE, I could say, is that the average person on the street doesn't understand the electric experience, doesn't understand the ecosystem, and probably thinks a lot of the time in the negative. The first questions you're always asked is, how long does it last? And they mean how far will it travel on the range, and how long does it take to charge? And the first people think of that is an objection, because you have to wait a period of time. It's not a way of managing your life. So it's basically, that's why I talk about the ecosystem, is having everything within the ecosystem to support this in place. Then we should be in the position to drive forward the change to electric vehicle. But there's a lot of elements that will come into play and need to come together. The government, the distributors, the manufacturers, the charging station suppliers, recycling. We've not talked about recycling, but recycling of batteries is a very important part of the ecosystem. So when we talk about how do we move this forward, there are a lot of elements that we need to take into place. But having said that, the elements are available. And the next point is to put the elements in place to drive forward the change from that point of view. Thank you very much. And that concludes my short presentation.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, very interesting. So I would like to apologize for the audience, and if you can, please bear with us. We'll extend the webinar by 15 minutes. So we'll have a presentation, and hopefully we'll try to at least spend 5 minutes to answer your questions. We have really super interesting questions that are coming. So with that, I'd like to introduce Abhilash, who is the head of Smart Cities at Al Nabuda Commercial Group. So Abhilash will give us a presentation about mainly the integration of the vehicles to the grid, to the buildings, etc. So the floor is yours, Abhilash. You have 10 minutes, please.
Can you see my screen right now?
Yes, we can see the screen, and you is clear as well. Just make it full screen and start.
So, can you see my entire screen or just a slide?
I can see your whole screen. So if you can just make it normal full screen mode.
Perfect. First thing, thank you very much, Ahmed, for this opportunity. It's a really challenging time. See, over the session, I think we went through a roller coaster. We started with EV chargers and fast chargers and the global perspective, all the way up to Mark coming and saying, okay, it's an ecosystem. We need to have an effective ecosystem, and the solutions have to be provided. It's good that we started with that, because let me introduce myself and the company. So I'm the head of Smart Cities for Al Nabuda. Al Nabuda is a 60-year-old company. So we have worked in different companies across different segments. And Smart Cities is the newest entity within the Al Nabuda group, which works. It's a very unique business where we are planning to work with multiple segments across all our already existing expertise, accumulate them together, and provide these services to our customers. Of course, as part of the smart city ecosystem, Mina Mobility LLC is a new company that we formed. It's hardly a year old, but we have done some considerable business and have been working to implement these new technologies as well. Coming to the discussion at hand, electric vehicles and electric vehicle charging within the smart city ecosystem. Just as Sam and Mark and Mr. Nicholas said, it's not just the technology, but the connectivities, the possibilities, and the connection between the car and the vehicle and the ecosystem of things like smart grid is what is important. So we come from an industry where all these expertise can be provided to our customers, and of course work with them to create these unique propositions across their requirements. And it could be a mobile app for any specific customer like a McDonald's, or could be a Lulu Mall, or could be the Dubai Mall, or any of those customers. We are ready to work with them to see how to implement these technologies within their requirement. That gives rise to the future. That meaning there are innovative business models. Of course, there are some cases that we will discuss and some technology combinations that will be needed to implement these systems. For that, what do we need? As part of the industrial revolution, internet has become part and parcel of our life. And of course, it's not just the IoT, as people call it, it's the feedback from the people, the services, and of course, tweaking the equipments to channel to those requirements. So you have seen specific applications and requirements, and also Mark spoke about the changing behavioral change in implementing these technologies. So all those comes with the onset of technologies. So let me go over to some ideas, some concepts that have driven these. So you would have heard about fast charging and slow charging. Let me get into a bit more of the concept level. Where a smart ecosystem, of course, is not just a single accumulation of these technologies, but of course, an integrated network of multiple, concepts themselves. Could be small smart homes at everyone's home where a charger is connected to a mobile app. The energy generator is a channel to different devices. You start from there, you go home to an office or a location where you want to either do your work or spend some leisure time. Either ways, smart, along with these smart technologies are quite important. So you see some of the technologies. I've tried to show illustrations of them, as to where the industry is heading towards. In a city, of course, electric bus technology and of the current automated charging technologies are, innovating the landscape. But it is more of the vehicles, the regular vehicles or the regular cars that are actually driving the numbers as we see. And of course, with buildings becoming more intelligent, all these devices, the car, the charger, and the entire ecosystem has been connected within these buildings to make building themselves intelligent. So this being the case, let me move on to what is happening globally. See, we have spoken about different technologies, but if they are not standardized, what's going to happen is everyone's going to bring in that technology, and that's what happened in the EV charging space. So over the evolution of EV charging, of course, in 2020, as of 2020, all these companies have already decided on what is the way forward and what are the charging standards that are going to be prominent to enable e-mobility. And this has become the primary reason for development, or I would say accumulation of ideas within these ecosystems. From there, of course, people spoke about the chargers themselves. What is the difference between an AC charger and DC charger? As you can see, the primary difference is, of course, the AC charger needs an onboard charger. So if you have AC chargers all across Dubai, there is a limitation on how much you can charge or how much power you can draw to charge your vehicle. That, and of course, it's dependent on the charger on board. And the heavier the charger, the higher the capacity of the charger, the lesser will be the mileage. So that's where the revolutionary shift happened, and people started focusing more on infrastructure type charging or fast and ultra fast charging, as we saw it. Of course, you would have, I don't know how many of you might have noticed, but in Nicolas' presentation, the AC charger had a limitation of 11 kilowatt. But the number that you see in the industry is 22 kilowatt. Of course, the 22 kilowatt is currently the standard highest power for all the AC charging sockets that you see. But from the vehicle point of view, there are hardly a limited number of vehicles that actually have this 22 kilowatt charging, and it's always the premium or the luxury end of the vehicles that usually go to that. From that, of course, comes the, okay, how many vehicles are there and what are the vehicles, what are their capabilities, how much power is needed for those vehicles to charge. All these information needs to be analyzed by the consumer. Let's say you're buying an electric vehicle, you need to actually have those knowledge upfront so that you can plan your charging accordingly. That's where I tried to explain how we can actually accumulate range anxiety, in this slide. So let me just put it in a perspective for you. Let's say you are somebody like, you or me, who's more or less sitting in the office and goes back home every day to your loved ones. In those cases, you have about 8 hours of charging to completely charge your car. So it means that during those 8 hours, your car is not available to move outside. So in the 16 hours, the vehicle is available. You can travel around. If your vehicle has a range of about 300 kilometers, you can have 300 kilometers of travel in one day. That's maximum you can do. But what happens when you combine it with AC and DC charging? Let's say you want to travel much further, or let's say you want to have, you want to move around a lot. You want to move from all the Emirates. You are having a meeting in Fujairah when you are in Abu Dhabi. So what will you do? How do you plan it ahead? So then comes the importance of these DC chargers, where you spend about 30 minutes to charge your vehicle. Apart from what you spend uh, the 8 hours of slow charging, and then typically your car is still available for 15 hours, but with a total range of 900 kilometers. So there are people across the world who actually travel about 1,000 kilometers every day, and these type of combination charging, with when you start with AC in the morning and then move on to DC, you will see that you can actually have more range plus more efficiency in the system, and the amount of energy that you consume is also utilized in a much better manner. Whereas when you talk about fleet owners, so in places where you need the vehicle running 24/7, it's just the driver that changes, but the vehicle keeps on running. In those cases, the only option that you see is DC charging, and with the DC charging enabled, the vehicle is available for 24 hours with the same 900 kilometers of vehicle range in a day. And that's typically how, depending on what type of solution each one of you want to implement, could be fleet, could be home charging with long distances of driving, or could be just a home to office kind of an application. You can completely, I would say, replace your existing cars with, of course, a combination of AC and DC charging. So that's the type of evolution that has happened. So how do we do that? Of course, there are 3 types of solutions depending on where you want to implement the chargers. The slower the capacity or the lower the capacity of charge, the longer the time taken to charge. So that's why you see residential, office, commercial, and public are the 4 main segments where you see vehicles actually charging. And depending on how much time you have to spend in those locations, you need to decide on what type of the technology you need to implement. Of course, all of them would be smart charging, but of course the technology is important. Over here, I've just explained just that. Of course, people spoke about AC destination charging ranging from 3 kilowatt to 22 kilowatt, and the highest power ultra fast charging, which goes up to 350 kilowatt at this point. But what is important is designing your system, or if you want to implement an EV charger in your campus, it needs to be based on the application. It means that, okay, if you have a parking lot where people can spend 2 to 4 hours to charge, then an AC destination charging or a low level DC destination charging would be more prominent, because depending on the vehicle themselves, it varies. It could be a mass market vehicle, then 11 kilowatt charger is more than enough. But if you go for faster charging,
you can have it up, please. So we can.
Yeah, I'm almost done. It's in the last
2 minutes
slides.
questions.
Yeah. So that being the case,
Thank
depending
you.
on where you want to implement, you need to plan ahead and have this charging plan. In commercial locations, of course, as Sam said, you have about 45 minutes to 60 minutes to charge. So it could be a combination of DC charging plus the destination plus a fast charging. But of course, on the highways or station level, you need to plan for 10 to 15 minutes of charging. So depending on what is the application you want to implement, you need to design them in that appropriate manner. With connectivity, of course, it's an entirely different ballgame. It's a different discussion altogether. It needs authentication, it needs connectivity, it needs the software connectivities, the interfaces, and the entire concept of back-end technologies needed to implement these solutions to the customers. Based on that, what are the different business models that are going to be coming up in the future? You do see EV charging as a service. You've already heard Sam from Green Parking speaking about EV charging as a service, where apps are needed to integrate, and complete communication ecosystem is needed to communicate between the chargers. You charge a customer based on time of usage, could be for 1 hour you charge a specific amount to the customer, or based on the amount of charge. Right now in UAE it is for free, but of course all these are possible only when you have an extensive network of infrastructure in place to enable that. The other type of charging is of course charging as a utility. These are basically could be within buildings, could be within parking lots, could be within any location where you want to charge the vehicles. It could be in a building and the energy could be taken from that specific building and then powered to your specific car. In this case, a kind of a network and a kind of like a smaller network can be created. Could be in your fleets, in your office buildings, you could actually have chargers installed and give these as additional bonuses to customers. In this case, customers are the employees, and the employee who has an electric vehicle might be charging for free, and incentive-based schemes can be planned, or they could even get coupons to actually do the charging at different locations. Similarly, the highways is different. So with the start, yeah, this is the last slide. So with those ideas and concepts, there are multiple technologies that come together to enable those small macro ecosystems, called smart homes, intelligent buildings, or even microgrids with solar and other types of technologies integrated, or even remote applications. So this being the case, of course, the world is moving towards implementing these technologies, and of course, depending on where you are within the smart city, you need to actually plan for that. Just to conclude, a wise man once said, technology can be smart, people can be smart, but if they don't come together, nobody's smart. So thank you very much for this opportunity, and over to you, Ahmed.
Thank you. Perhaps you can stop sharing the screen, Maria. Thank you, and thanks for the audience for staying till now. So this recording will be available. So if you have something other commitment, leave. But we try to answer a couple of questions, which again will be available in the recording. So I have a very interesting question here. Perhaps we start this one for Nicholas. So someone is asking, what are the major trends for faster charging, and what do you think would be the outlook for faster charging so that EVs will be comparable with ICEs in terms of charging versus fueling speed?
Hi, sorry, I didn't hear the first part of the question.
So what are the current trends for faster charging? When do you think faster charging will be comparable will make EVs comparable with ICEs in terms of the speed of charge or the time to charge versus the time to refuel?
Yeah. So fast charging installations are growing faster than slow charging, especially. I mean, we're talking about public charging, of course. That has to do with all the issues that we heard before, from availability and utilization and how you use it and where and all that. So there is definitely a trend there that seems to, at least in my opinion, seems to that can be sustained. Now, there's of course a cost element, and managing the cost of electricity will be a tricky issue, and that will depend a lot on local conditions. So, for example, if in some grid you have what you call demand charges, that can have an effect on how much you pay for the actual electricity, which is not so much related to the the dollars or the euros per kilowatt hour price. So there are a lot of issues that have to be considered and business models that have to be developed. My opinion is that this is an open field for entrepreneurs, business and everything to go out there and actually build those solutions. And we have seen a lot of, we saw today as well, a lot of these that happening in different places in the world. And I think that that will continue. In terms of, so a lot of the energy that will be delivered to EVs will be delivered through fast and ultra-fast chargers. In terms of connectors themselves, I mean, people will probably take the opportunity to charge at home at night if they have that opportunity. So these are the, I think that in terms of an individual, like a private consumer, a private user, that if they have the opportunity, that will be their first choice, charge at home at night. And then probably it will be the combination of fast charging in public places or in, like in their businesses or wherever they spend time throughout the day. So that's how I see mostly the development of that. But again, in my opinion, and perhaps Sam and Abdullah here have a lot more insight on that. In my opinion, it's literally an open ground for new businesses, ideas, and things to develop.
Indeed, can't agree more. Thanks so much, Nicholas. My next question is to Mark, and I think Hannah is asking, what are the automotive companies doing to promote new electric vehicle models and increase the diverse range of the models that are currently available? So, if you would like to take that one, Mark.
Okay. I think if you look at all the automotive companies now that will bring out a number of new models in the next 2 to 3 years. We have already planned, I think, 4 new models for us, 4 to 5 new models for us. What you'll also see is battery capacity is increasing. So with that, range increases, and also charging capacity increases. So the time of charge decreases. So everything is moving towards more of what the consumer requires. And again, it's a case of the way you probably just change your culture or your management of your life to fit in with that need. I mean, I always say electric vehicles are a mobility solution. They're not the answer. I think we all have to really realize and understand that, is that people think it's the answer to drive 900 kilometers. No, it's not. It fits in with a solution. And as technology develops, the solution develops with it as well. And probably in 15 years' time, conversations like this will be forgotten totally, and we'll all be in the change mode, and we'll never have thought of petrol and diesel vehicles. It will be something our children they won't even have remembered from that point. So, but all of the automotive manufacturers today are bringing new models forward with, as I said, increased battery capacity and increased charging capacities as well. We're talking 100 kilowatt chargers now as well. So we're all moving in that way.
Thank you, Mark. And I have a question then for Sam, which goes a little bit to the consumer behavior. This has been a lot of challenges, a lot of issues for people who have EVs and they live in towers. There's no way, I don't know if there's a way, perhaps you can tell us, how can we prevent the residents or visitors who are visiting a tower or a mall, etc., from missing the space for EVs? Sometimes people just leave the car for 5 hours, even though it's fully charged, and just leave it. So is there a way from tech perspective that could prevent this?
Yeah, thank you very much. This is already a problem with 5,000 EVs that we have in the market, and that's going to be a huge problem once we target the 1 million EVs that we're hoping for. So to give you an example, and I had this example last time we met. We are at the tower where we have 5,000 parking bays. Yeah, and the facility management of the tower was able to provide us exactly with enough spare power to power 1 electric vehicle. So we have 5,000 parking bays, and we have spare power for 1 vehicle at the moment. And we have currently already in this tower 10 electric vehicles. So whoever comes in the morning, basically, it's like a lottery, correct? You're very happy when you come here, the first one, you can plug your car, and nobody else can use the charger until you have to leave, So what's going to happen in the future, and that's why our presentation focused so much on smart charging, is every building, every landlord, every facility management company would need to organize and operate the charger operations. So, and that cannot be fixed. This is something that is going to be in the flow. So now we have in this tower 10 electric vehicles. The facility management company can come and say, well, I'm going to provide each one of you, I don't know, 5 hours a week or 10 hours a week, and you have to use that app and tell me what's your preferential times, and this is the way where this is going to be handled in the future. But let's say in 2 or 3 months, we could have 20 cars or 30 cars instead of the 10. So that's a continuous process to handle demand and supply. Because what's not going to happen is that suddenly these towers are going to have so much additional spare power by the utility companies that they will be able to solve their problems. So what we see, for example, in our region is the government and the utility companies are investing billions of dollars in new power plants, basically solar power plants. But these power plants are going to be good for new projects, but they are not going to reach the existing infrastructure, because the most expensive part of that is to run new infrastructure from these power plants to the existing buildings. So that's not going to happen in the near future. That means we will be having to live with scarce supply of electric vehicle chargers to an increasing number of cars, and that's only going to be handled through apps and through management companies that are able to handle these apps. So as Abhilash showed in his presentation, the last 2 slides, there will be new business models, and what Nicholas just said, for entrepreneurs to come into this segment and say, you know, facility management company, you are not an expert, you're not going to be an expert, let us handle it for you for a small fee, and we keep your customers satisfied.
Thank you very much, Sam. Would like to conclude with this question to Abhilash. Going back to the UAE, so the question for you, Abhilash, is how are the government entities in the UAE are preparing themselves for the smart mobility integration? Because integration again is a key word. So if you can let us know about this, and this would be the last question we conclude the webinar with.
Sure. I mean, there are 2 parts to this question. Okay, because one side is the government and the other side are the consumers themselves. So on one side you have the government trying to create a common platform for integrating all these different technologies coming from different parts of the world, which is being done by DEWA at a really good sense. Of course, it takes time, it takes stages. So they are in the first stage of the ecosystem, but as it grows, more and more companies come and try to be charge point operators. I think it's going to be a common platform where they're going to be maintaining and managing that. So that's the way forward that I see from the government side of things. It could be in the RTF's parking lots, it could be in the government buildings, or it could be the government-owned areas as well, which will be the first movers and first drivers. And on the other side, you have some consumers who want to, let's say, by consumers, I mean people who have bulk customers, the facility management companies themselves. They already charge people based on premium parking, right? So might be along with the parking, that could be an infrastructure that could also be in place. But right now, what's happening is, facility management company comes at the end of the complete project. They don't plan it ahead during the entire ecosystem of any building, and by the end, when facility management team takes over, there is not enough power to actually manage. So same thing what Sam faces in his building. But for greenfield buildings, starting from scratch, of course, the regulations are there. It's already being seen in other parts of the world, where a certain amount of power is already allocated to electric vehicles. A separate feeder is also allocated to electric vehicles, and those needs to be incorporated by these consultants and the contractors who are looking to provide these construction projects themselves. So right now, it is them that needs to be educated on the future rather than the government themselves, who are already doing a phenomenal task of planning the integration from a UAE point of view. Hope that answered the question.
Thank you very much, Ash. So I think just as a conclusion, I think everyone has a role, and we as CBC are very happy to be part of this transition and support as much as we can, not just the UAE, but all countries in the MENA region. EVs have a big part to play in accelerating the transition to clean energy. So thanks everyone who joined and stayed now. And I would like to thank all the speakers and the sponsors, Green Parking and Nabuda. So if you haven't downloaded the paper, please do so. It's in the handout section. It will also be sent out to all attendees along with the recording and some of the presentations slides. Thanks everyone. And with that, we conclude the webinar. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.